What I was
We continue our discussion of higher education in the North American Division. And we were introduced to this by Drs. Leo Ranzolin and Charles Dart last time. We ran out of time. And we might run out of time again today because of my poor planning. It's usually best to have one person at a time speak, 1 week at a time. But last time I made the mistake of having two stand up there, and look at this again. We have two, so it's going to be hard to sort of keep things within the time constraints that we have, but it's important that we do. I am going to ask Dr. Alpoon, who is a brand new grandmother, I understand. Oh, just you don't have to. I understand that you're a brand new grandmother. Is that okay?
Yes.
To say? All right. Can you tell us any more?
She was born yesterday in the morning, and my daughter is resting, and she's, of course, the most precious child on the planet.
Okay. May I invite you to have the first question or comment after their presentations?
Sure.
Okay. Let's see, who should have the second one? Brother Schofield, would you be willing to have the second question or comment, please? And maybe who will have the third one? Peter. Sure. We will have 1, 2, 3, so we'll get right at it swiftly, and then the rest of us can join in. Let's pause for prayer. Dear God, again, we thank you for this place, for this time, for Roy's legacy, and for the many educational institutions which have served our church and the world so well for so long. As we look into the future, help us to think big and not small. Help us to think about succeeding, not how to avoid failure. We pray that somehow your Holy Spirit, which sparks creativity, will be felt among us. In Christ's name, amen.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Is this on? Can you hear? Yep. So last time, when Leo and I were here, we had some presentations. This time, it's just in our heads, so you have to read through that. But you have the declaration, I believe, in front of you. When we got there to Chicago, we were met with this schedule that's behind us. And it was a Friday, Sabbath, and half of Sunday schedule. What I'd like to just remind you, when I was here a couple of weeks ago, I talked to you about trends a little bit and how the Adventist colleges and universities had worked together with each other in really forming a consortium of and collaboration on the enrollment side. You remember me talking about that? Adventist Enrollment Association began in 2001. ACU, which is a group of the presidents, financial VPs, and academic VPs, that makes up ACU. They were formed in 2003. And so we've been working together to try to increase Adventist population in our Adventist schools. That was some of the main focus for these two groups working together and trying to collaborate. In 2010, that was the high mark for enrollment numbers. 2010. There was over 27,000, this is both Adventist and non-Adventist students, enrolled in the 13 Adventist colleges in North America. Right now, we're about at 23.6. The numbers have just come in, we're about there. I believe 6 schools went up in enrollment this year right now, and 7 went down. Some of the down is significant, and some of it's just you just barely move. But this is total enrollment. It's not first-time freshmen in any college. It's not undergrad. It's not grad. It's all of them together combined So 6 are up, 7 are down. And the percentage of decrease was just over 1%. It was about 1.5%. It's kind of stabilized. Some years was a little bit more than that, but still it's a downward trend. And so now we're looking at what do we do to increase numbers? And can we increase Seventh-day Adventist population? You know, here at Loma Linda, and several of you, I see we are on committees together, we are in meetings together. We are talking about how do we increase enrollment here at Loma Linda. And by the way, Loma Linda was one of the schools that was up. How do we increase enrollment, and how do we increase Seventh-day Adventist population, the percentage of Adventists? And that's really what the Chicago Summit's all about. How do we survive? There's an article in Inside Higher Ed. I get this electronic information on a daily basis. And there's an article in there on will small colleges survive, private colleges. They interviewed the financial VPs. And it's interesting how as you move through the last decade, how a lot of those VPs are a little concerned about small colleges. Just looking at the finances, forget anything else, looking at the finances. And what's interesting, about 44%, I believe, if I remember correctly, are concerned and are considering collaboration or even connecting with other schools. And these are some of the things that, Leo, you and I saw and heard about in Chicago. So as far as trends are concerned, just to help you understand how schools get students. In order to get a new student into the school, they call it discounting. They'll give a scholarship. They'll give discounting some money. So if your tuition's $20,000 and you want to discount it, give it a $5,000 scholarship, that's great. Most of the schools are $20,000. They're usually more than that. Just an example. So you're not getting the $20,000, you're only getting $15,000. And so one of the questions that was asked in this article of the financial VPs is, are you concerned about discounting? And almost half of them were concerned and thinking that they could not sustain the discounting rates that they have right now. I was in a meeting at La Sierra University with the AEA. It was an executive meeting in January, and we had several large companies, some groups that come in and work with schools, talk to us about all kinds of things, what's going on in the world right now in enrollment. And they have said, and I might have mentioned this last time I was here, that even public schools now are considering discounting. Usually it's been the private schools. That's the UCs and the Cal States. And right now they don't. There are some scholarships if you qualify, but for anything else, they haven't really done that a lot. But they are now considering discounting. And I will tell you the discount rates at a lot of the private schools are anywhere from 25 to 45%. That's an awful lot of discounting. Now you know why some of the financial VPs are concerned. So with that in mind, it's how do we, as Adventist colleges and universities, increase our enrollment and increase Seventh-day Adventist population. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to give it to Leo because he's got some other ideas and information he wants to share with you.
Thank you, Chuck. Nicely stated. And just to perhaps elaborate a little more fully on diagnosing the problem, because I think we need to be crystal clear about diagnosing the current situation that we find ourselves in before we begin to explore some solutions. So I actually would like to read some of the bullet points of the diagnosis. Does everybody here have a copy of the Chicago Summit? If you don't, I think there's some still around here. You perhaps raise your hand and we'll make sure that you get one of those. So here are the realities that Chuck alluded to. In light of the following realities, declining population of traditional college and university student population, as Chuck nicely stated. And here's the thing, when you actually look at demographics up through 2025, the literature that I've read, it suggests that it's going like this in terms of the number of high school graduates. And then in 2025, I just read a recent article, it's going to go like this. It's just going to take a precipitous drop. And the reason for that is I think millennials are just not having kids. And so that's going to be an enormous challenge for our schools to maintain their Adventist population. Decreasing financial capacity of many SDA families to afford private education. That's definitely true, especially as the expression of Adventism in the NAD becomes far more multi-ethnic. And the families that do have kids, we've got quite a few from lower social economic standing and are would struggle to be able to afford our tuition both at our academies as well as our universities. Decreasing willingness to borrow to finance a private education. When Susan and I graduated from from Tacoma Academy, we were going to go to CUC no matter what. We didn't care how much tuition they were going to charge. Now, when I talk to 18-year-olds, they start asking a couple of questions. How much is it going to cost me? How much debt am I going to get into? And what is the nature of the education in terms of its quality? 18-year-olds these days are far more astute and discerning about those matters than those of us from earlier generations. Extraordinary increases in costs of providing traditional college and university experience over the past 25 years. Chuck again has alluded to that. Increasing availability of competitive education modalities that no longer require a residential campus. There you have examples. Employer expectations for competency-based education. More and more companies are starting to get frustrated with the traditional undergraduate, liberal arts graduate, that they just don't have the kind of knowledge and especially skill set that they're looking for. Closure of SDA schools in both K-12 and higher education sectors, and the lack of supportive structure between the SDA Adventist K-12 and higher education entities in our division. So there's I think, a nice diagnosis of the current situation and problem that we find ourselves in. And just to close my part of our opening comments with a story. Sorry you can't really read the schedule of the events too well there, but there it is. We started Thursday night, and we ended Sunday morning on August 12th. But if you can't read that, you'll notice that on Thursday night, our very own Dr. Richard Hart gave the keynote address. And he opened up with his story. And his story is this. He went to one of our schools, I believe in Idaho, K-8, one-room school with, 40 students, I think is what it was. Then he graduated from that and went to, I think, Upper Columbia Academy, and then to Walla Walla University, and then to Loma Linda. And so his point is, I am a poster child example of a product of Adventist education. And he said that those stories just really aren't really happening as much anymore. That seems to be a dying paradigm and model stories of our kids going through schools. He did mention that his elementary school is closed, is no longer there, and that has been, I think, duplicated across the NAD with lots of K-8 and K-12 schools having closed the last 20, 25 years. So there's the dilemma, there's the problem. And what this summit tried to do is to address this current dilemma that Adventist higher education faces in the NAD and come up with some solutions. And one of those is what you have in your hand there, is to create a Adventist educational system in which all 13 schools would perhaps have a board that would oversee the 13 schools. So that's kind of where we're at. I understand that ACU has been charged with the responsibility to create a committee of 8 or 9 persons to craft a new vision for this system.
I didn't expect you to hit every point, but I absolutely support the success objectives. My concern are the logistics that impact collaboration. For example, we're on the quarter system at Loma Linda. We tried to collaborate with Union, who's on the semester system. We use Canvas for our learning management system. They use something else. And those logistics have really proven to be huge stumbling blocks. And I'll let somebody else talk about affordability and how we don't get national taxes to support us.
So if you see here on Friday evening, Andrea Lexton and Vanita Sauter had a combined presentation. And Vanita talked about 3 schools that tried to do this, Laura. It's Union, Southwestern, and Southern. And their academic VPs talk on a weekly basis, phone meetings, Zoom meetings, whatever. They started going down this process, and it's exactly the problem that you mentioned. It seems fairly easy. Oh, you know, one teacher could stand up in one classroom and teach via electronic stuff to several campuses, the one right in front of them plus the 2 others. Here's what they discovered, and these are the little things that, when you're looking at a system or if you're looking at collaboration, that just jump right in your face you haven't even thought about. One is the technology that they were using was all of the same. So they had some real problems when they first started. They'd been doing it for 3 years. Some students couldn't see very well, some students couldn't hear very well, some students thought that the teacher wasn't looking at them or reacting to them. So that was some of the problem. But even down to the time of start for the class, not because Eastern time zone versus Central time zone, but on the hour versus on the half hour. So they had to make a lot of changes. They had to get together and say, okay, is it even worth it for us to try this? They were able to do it. I don't know how the students felt, and she had some reaction to it, and I think overall, at the 3rd year, it was doing a little bit better. One of the things that they realized was about $20,000 in savings. So the question is it worth it? In 3 years, a lot of headaches. I was talking with Lonnie Mixon yesterday. He is our president of AEA, and he is vice president of enrollment at Adventist University Health in Florida. And so we were talking about this, and he says, you know, in that information that they shared with us, he says, is that really something that we're going to work towards if it doesn't really save any money? What it did do, when I went back and reviewed this, was it did have full-time faculty teaching the classes versus contract teacher, possibly. So it would eliminate some of that, which helps, I guess, some financially, and it would help, you would know for sure you would have a Seventh-day Adventist instructor there. But when you start thinking of semesters, quarters, the systems that we're using, how to deliver the information versus how to show it to the students, that is where it becomes big and expensive. So I don't know if I've answered your question. They have tackled it a little bit, but it's just shown what truly it's going to take to get the system working right.
Just a brief comment on that. Yes, nicely highlights the challenge of just on a really, I would argue, relatively small issue of trying to overcome an impulse to collaborate and partner. Having said that, I think you were here when we were here a couple of weeks ago when I shared with you the SUNY system. 64 schools overseen by one board of trustees, and the challenges that they faced were simply enormous. Surely this one can be overcome if we're to partner and collaborate. The larger issue for me that prevents us from doing that is this territoriality that the unions have and their powerful connection with their school within the union. That, to me, is the fundamental problem that we need to figure out to overcome.
I feel like a failure because several years ago I showed you a lot of charts of enrollment and peaking and everything like that, and everyone seems to have forgotten that. I think that there's a causal factor here that isn't even being discussed. And I'll just be blunt. The market and demand for Adventist liberal arts education is declining. It's just not there the way it was in 1980. The demand probably peaked in 1980, and the enrollment peaked in 2010 because they were backfilling with non-Adventist students to sustain the enrollment and the revenue. I think there are three major factors driving down NAD Adventist enrollment. One is the shift in demographics to low-income minorities, and there's some recognition of that. I put it in different words. The second is simply it's far more expensive to run a college and provide a credible education that will, and we can talk for an hour on how do you define quality. But if the parents don't perceive quality, then that's a problem. And the third is, what I don't hear anybody talking about is a change in the theology of salvation. And I didn't see anything in Chicago about this. The enrollment numbers from the 40s and the 50s and the 60s were abnormally high, I say, due to parental fear. Fear that if they don't send their children to an Adventist college, the children will leave the church and be eternally lost. And that fear is prevalent today in many of the senior citizens that I talk to today. But I think in Adventist pop theology, there's been a shift in their understanding of God's unconditional love. And that was concealed in traditional Adventist doctrine and teaching through the 30s and 40s. Parents are now willing to send their children to Harvard and Point Loma and Westmont and the UC system. They save money and they perceive that they get better facilities. If the child slips away from Adventism, it is no longer a catastrophe. The parents may be sad, but they're not devastated. And nobody's talking about this shift in popular theology, and I think this creates a diminished demand among the Adventist high school students for Adventist higher education. And that makes the current NAD educational model unsustainable.
Was there a question there? Michael has been in my office many, many times, and we've discussed this as I work on my dissertation. And we talked about many of the things you just brought up. In Chicago, it's true, we did not talk about anything theology that I could recall.
Well, Robert Benny a little bit on the Sabbath morning one.
Yes, right. But as far as the actual shift from what parents perceive
That's right.
to what it used to be when we were going to school, or when I was teaching in academy, it's changed a lot. I'm trying to think of how to respond to that. In my dissertation, I am getting data from students that graduated in 2018. I've just got my surveys back and I'm crunching numbers as we speak. And I'm comparing it to Dr. Benita Sauter's dissertation that she collected the data in 2005. And because I don't have everything run, this is going to be just preliminary. But one of the things that I have talked with my methodologist as well as some other people that are on my team and at Andrews, I discovered something which is kind of interesting, and that is there were quite a few students that somehow we had their names and indicated that they were Seventh-day Adventists, but when asked the question if they connected to the church, there were over almost 150 that said no out of 800, actually out of 750. That was mind-boggling to me. Because at that point, I needed a Seventh-day Adventist to answer the questionnaire, and on my survey it said, "Thank you for your time." Then as we go through and look at specific questions, we have discovered that there's a lot of them that don't want to have any, they don't want to even tell me their gender. They don't want to tell me their ethnicity. So it might be it's just this generation doesn't want to say a lot about who they are. If that's the case, then we have a problem because we can't go out and find them. Part of the problem is ACU wanted Vanita to chair the joint marketing committee. I told you that a couple weeks ago. So we could get more Seventh-day Adventists into the system. But we didn't know where they were. We didn't have access to them because we couldn't get the information through the churches. So if the case is that they're actually not wanting to give us the information, it's going to make it even more difficult for us to find them personally and to talk with the parents to help them understand it is important for them to be in an Adventist school if we still feel that. Through my doctorate program, I've been working with Larry Burton, who is a researcher and educator there in the School of Ed at Andrews. And I've been working with him for about 2 or 3 years on a study, case study. It's actually a grounded theory study, where they had a survey of all the alumni from all the colleges and universities to see how they related to their Adventist experience, to see if they were still in the church, and on and on. So we got those results. And so we have those results, and now we're doing interviews with students. And so we're doing a grounded theory, so we do the interview, we talk to them, we look at what they say, and it's amazing still that the more you're in an Adventist school, the longer you're in an Adventist education system, and if you graduate from college, the more likely you will be a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church and an active member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It's there. The problem is, Michael, some of the parents and some of the students aren't seeing that that's important. So that's where I'm answering you on that.
Okay, before we go to the other side of the room, I'd like to see if any of the educational administrators on this side of the room would like to comment.
Dave, can I just respond real quick to this? Yeah.
Go ahead.
And just to be clear, I think there's perhaps one stat that really captures the essence of what Michael and Chuck have just said, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is this, that of the number of Adventist students attending college, only 25 to 30% of them are attending Adventist colleges. Is that right? That 60 to 70% of them are attending non-Adventist colleges.
Over 75% of Adventist college-age students do not go to Adventist colleges.
Okay. I mean, that stat speaks volumes of the condition, the current situation that we find ourselves in.
Okay, beginning with Dr. Zuccarelli, do you want to say anything? You don't have to. Okay, coming down, Dr. Taylor, do you want to say anything? Sylvia, do you want to say anything about this?
Totally understand what you're saying. I was in this system years and years and years ago. And, we did all kinds of crazy things trying to recruit and help with getting understanding out that there was a reason to be in this school. My 2 sons went through an Adventist school, and one of them has passed away, but the other is no longer in church. And I can honestly say we did all we could. But other things come into their lives. It's a crazy world we live in. Their children are both in Christian schools, but not Adventist schools. So, I can say amen to what you said. There just isn't the follow through. I'm sorry about that.
Ron has things to say.
A quick question. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, there's 12 known as the Mormons. They have this big university, and then over at UCR they have an LDS center for the students at UCR to have some religious education and some fellowship. Has that kind of model been discussed at all in Adventist circles?
I do know that there are, and I don't know at how many schools, but I do know that there are pastors or chaplains that are working with students at different campuses throughout the U.S. I was principal at San Fernando Valley Academy, and I think there was somebody that was helping out a little bit, or at least there have been in the past. That's a question probably for youth ministries, but I believe that there are some pretty significant methods trying to work with students, Christian students, Adventist students in public universities. But I don't know if it's at a level of, oh yeah, this is the person over that at the General Conference of North American Vision. I have never heard of that. Has anyone else?
That's what Roy started out to do way back in 1967, you know. So in this class, we ought to look at that from time to time.
So, but your question gets at one school with Mormon centers scattered throughout the other schools in North America. That's your point, right? Can we do something of the sort? And I've wondered myself, one school with Adventist centers across universities in which Adventist kids are attending. I tell you, from this conference and during lunch hour and talking with folks from other schools, and this alludes to my earlier comment, there is a profound desire to keep their schools vital and alive within their unions. And to speak of one, like say 2 GC schools like Andrews and Loma Linda as being the only ones, they look at you like, yeah. So I don't think we'll ever go to something of that sort. And yet, simply speaking of the demographics in the next 10 years, I just, as Michael has said, I just don't see how we could have 13 schools survive. The demographics that is coming our way. It's just not possible.
The Mormons have always been very corporate, and Adventists had always been very individual.
Yes.
And it still plays out in this territorialism about schools and everything else.
Right here, David.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, you.
Okay, over to Peter, then to Norma, if that's all right. You know, Bernard, I watch YouTube late at night, watching the buffalo and the lions fight. And I have had no respect for lions because they attack from the back. And I love the buffalo because they chase the lions down from the front. The worst thing an animal can do is turn its back to a lion and run, because the lion will overcome it. The best thing it can do is turn around and face it and run the lion back. And it feels to me like you folk in Chicago are doing like the animals that turn their back to the lion and run instead of forcing it back. And I want you to be more aggressive, more positive, more venturesome, more creative, and push that lion back instead of trying to run faster than it is.
I thought David was talking about football there a minute, about the Lions.
With your permission, 2 questions. It's okay? The first one, what effects, positive or negative, in your view, had on the Adventist system, educational system, or even in the whole church, had the fact that we accepted, or the church accepted, funds from the government? And the second question is the curriculum of today in the Adventist schools and universities reflecting the needs of the day? And let me quickly explain why I'm asking this question. We were facing this situation when our daughter graduated from La Sierra University. She wanted to go into law school, but she needed a course in logic, and there was not such a course offered by La Sierra. And we have to look around for that course for her to take. Then this is my question. Today, is the curriculum in our schools and universities reflecting the needs of the day in our society?
think Dr. Kiddo may have an answer for that. He's got his hand up there.
Yeah, but I got one down here.
Okay, but I think he wants to roll specifically to that
Did
question.
you want to speak to that? Oh, whoop, I'll be.
I happened to be at the same conference, though I wasn't at many of the meetings. I was at the meeting in which the lady discussed the combination of the three universities. And I thought that was one of the most encouraging presentations of any of the presentations. To specifically answer the question about the idea of the logic class. The power of the Adventist system, even as diversified as it is that if you take each campus separately, you take the professors, let's say, in physics, for example, at any university, like at La Sierra, there might be only 2 teachers. But if you take the 13, there's probably a faculty of a dozen or maybe 15 with PhDs in all kind of different areas. And therefore, the ability to offer specialty courses, upper division specialty courses, now is amplified. And so the fact that any campus can for upper division courses, or even for graduate courses, can only offer a very limited network. If you have this more combined system that Southern, Union, and Southwestern have together, their faculties now are a combination of the 3 universities, and therefore they can offer much more unique, specialized courses that we can't currently offer. And so the power is not so much, in my opinion, financial. The ability to offer the kind of courses that big-time universities can offer because they have a large population, and because of the large faculties that they have, they can offer very unique courses that we can't offer because any given college is too small. But the thing that she mentioned was that they were able to offer some of these more unique classes because of the combined faculty that existed and the combined student body that existed between the 3 universities. So I personally think that that's a terrific model that they have. And the possibilities, I think, are great, and not necessarily financial, but I think academically there's great possibilities. And answering the question about logic, they could offer a course in logic if they had the faculty and the students that were wide enough combined, I think.
If I could speak to Peter's question, I think it's important to realize that as I look at traditionally Adventist liberal arts colleges and universities, their curricula has been shaped to prepare students for really 3 professional degrees: medicine, dentistry, and nursing. And then on the liberal arts side, theology. That's kind of been how curriculum, that's right, and education, right. And so now we have Adventist families coming with their kids with interests and desires outside of those disciplines, and our curricula is unprepared to address those interests.
Right here.
The first question? Oh.
Here, so the first one, I've been doing this for quite a while, and there has been a little bit of discussion, especially here in California, when the LGBTQ thing came up and the private schools were going to say no, and that was an issue because of Cal Grant. So the federal money and the state money, so far, I haven't been in a lot of discussion of not using it, but I think there's been some discussions of what's going to happen if, like here in California, I don't remember the number of the law that was they were trying to pass, but if that happens, it could put a lot of us without any financial aid at all from feds or state. And I know ACU was talking about it, and I know Dr. Hart was talking about it because I was in some meetings with them. But right now, we're still accepting, and we have been for a long, long time, the federal aid from the feds and the states. So, does that help answer your question? The one thing I will tell you at Chicago, the number one reason they wanted to do something, they feel like we need to do something, is to reduce the tuition and help the debt of the students go down. That was number one when we took the vote. Leo, do you remember? That was the top reason we should do something, is to reduce tuition and lower the debt to students.
One more thing with respect to that question about federal aid, because I think it's an important one. And in my conversations with educators and attorneys, it's this. Many feel that the repercussions of the Supreme Court decision on same-sex marriage is going to profoundly impact faith-based colleges and universities in the future. To where if our stance is too draconian and conservative and fundamentalist, it may well compromise our ability to obtain federal funding. And if we aren't able to obtain federal funding along those lines, that's going to challenge all of our schools in profound ways.
Okay, right here.
I think one of the problems that we need to consider more carefully are the elementary schools, because that's where the academies recruit from. And when there is no elementary school, Adventist school, they don't get that ability to get those children. But even more important than are the high schools. I think high school students, they make their life decisions in those 4 years. I watched my own grandchildren. I watched the grandchildren and children of my friends who don't choose to go to academies, maybe because there isn't one that's available, or because that's also expensive. Once we give up on the elementary schools, we're giving up a lot.
Can you speak to that?
Yeah. You're hitting it right on the head, because we have a system. It's a K-16 system. And unfortunately, I'm not sure we've done a super duper job of growing the K-8 and the 9-12 or K-12. In my stats right here, starting in '86, going through 2012, this is academy enrollment. It was higher than the college enrollment, just a little. It was about 18,000 students in '86. And in 2012, we were just hovering right around 12,500 to 13,000. So it's been up and down, up and down, up and down. But yes, that's where the colleges traditionally go, is to the academies.
And look at the academies that are no longer there.
I know. I've been keeping track of that since I've been working on my dissertation. They keep closing. There's some that open. I have a whole philosophy on that we won't get in today. But yeah, the K-12 population has not necessarily gone up, and that's where we recruit.
In some sense, what's happened to our elementary schools and academies is now finally starting to impact our colleges, where families have stopped sending our kids to our K-12 schools, and that impulse and inclination is starting to manifest itself, I think, in a greater degree than it has in the past, to our colleges and universities. So, yeah, it's a trend.
Right here.
May I remind this group that beyond the colleges, there is a super college that we know as Loma Linda University. And very little that I've heard here this morning really addresses the unique situation, both in terms of enrollment and finances. However, I would like to remind some of my contemporaries that many years ago, these issues were foreseen as they apply to Loma Linda, and Dean David Hinshaw, who was the dean I had to deal with when I first came here, he recruited me, and I had to live through the era when he reduced the medical school requirement from 4 years of college and 4 years of medical school down to one commitment of 6 years in medical school. And the trouble was that there was an outcry, of course, from all the colleges who were seeing the whole population of medicine aiming students, and the bright ones, leaving the college campus after just 2 years. And Dr. Hinshaw was so attacked because of this innovative idea. There were 2 medical school classes started in each academic year here for only a short time. But I saw those medical students coming through in my department in the senior year of medical school, and they were no worse prepared than the 4-year graduates we are accustomed to having. We returned to the old system just to conserve the enrollment in the Adventist colleges around the country. So,
I'm glad you came and spoke of Loma Linda, because as I've only been here 4 years now this January, as I reflect on Loma Linda University, what's happening here with our 8 schools in terms of its makeup of administrators, faculty, staff, and students is really an Adventist experiment for an Adventist faith-based Christian college university. Because we are being impacted by these educational trends and demographic trends. We simply do not have enough Adventist faculty and leaders and students to remain viable in the future. And our leadership here, our board of trustees and others have said, you know, let's find another way to survive. And as academic dean, as I go to these committees and talk with other deans, I'm seeing in some schools, programs, there's less than 50% Adventist students that are in these programs. There's faculty here from other Christian faiths, other religions. And so Loma Linda is finding a way to survive. It's in many ways, I think, an experiment for the other schools to consider in the future. And it's fascinating to be here and to see what is taking place.
I was just curious if there's been any significant efforts to recruit foreign Adventist college students, Europe, Asian.
I think every school probably does some type of international recruiting. Having worked at Andrews is anywhere, this is in the nation, either 5th or 6th in diversity. And so they have a huge international population, but it's a general conference school, and there might be one person from one country there representing that country, and so it's counted. Part of the problem, and I can say this more because I was dealing with the financials and everything else from when the students would come to Andrews, so I can talk about that more than I can here at Loma Linda. Part of the problem is finances. So you do get students that can afford it, but you have a lot of students that want to be there that can't afford it, and so it's always been a problem. I don't know that we have done an enormous amount of, hey, let's go get more students from outside the U.S. to come in. A lot of schools do. In fact, some articles in Inside Higher Ed I just read this week included that population is declining, and this is to any public schools. It's just that in general, which I thought was kind of interesting. One thing that I know the academies have done is they have gone after international students to help with putting money in the pot. There's a problem with that if you don't have a pretty strict percentage of how many students you're going to allow in that are outside the norm, because again, you have parents that want their kids to go to that school, and if there's an overabundance of international students, they don't look like your student, and there's flight. So I haven't seen it so much in the university side. I know that there are quite a few international students here at Loma Linda. In fact, I think there's probably 80 different countries represented, maybe about 50 to 60 religions represented on our campus. And in the School of Allied Health, we have quite a few students from several countries that come to our programs because it works for them. They have a bachelor's degree and they're licensed, like in physical therapy, but they don't have the master's and the doctorate. So most of our students and our post-professional MPT and DPT are from outside the U.S.
I just want to come back now as our time starts drawing to a close to underscore the central thesis of what happened here with the summit. And that is this. There's this recognition that we need to collaborate, that we need to partner. And there's this one book that they encourage us to read that I alluded to 2 weeks ago. And there was chapter after chapter in there of educators saying, with respect to the future of our higher education, you either partner or you die. And that's just a fact. You have to partner. You have to collaborate. And so the 13 NAD schools, I think, face an extraordinary challenge in the next 10 years, that if they are going to find some way to survive, collaboration and partnership is absolutely essential. And so please, all of us, think about what would that look like if we were to partner and collaborate? What kind of system do we need for our schools to survive? I think Dr. Zuccarelli has his hand up there.
He's good.
I've come to realize that the financial problem is much greater than I thought, and it has deteriorated over the last 10 years. During the time of the Obama administration, they started to look at which educational systems offered the best value for money. And in the early surveys, as I looked through the Chronicle of Education survey, the Adventist colleges, many of them, were doing very well in that rating. This was good value for the money. And then the Harvards, Stanfords, and others said, wait a minute, you haven't got your facts right. And so they went after US News and World Report and others that were doing it, and sat down with them and showed why they thought it should be different. So then, in recent years, as I've looked at that survey, Harvard, Stanford, the others are at the top, and the Adventist colleges are right at the bottom. So I looked into how this could possibly be. And then I found that at Stanford, if your income to the family is less than $100,000, you get free education. Likewise at Harvard, it may be even higher there. So in actual fact, a lot of Adventist families are looking at free education at the best institutions in this country versus a very expensive education in some places. So I think we need to start thinking about some Adventist solutions to lower education. 2-year colleges are much less expensive to run, and to have some community college type functioning, I think would make the move forward. And then we need to look at the nursing school's recent experience on this campus where they lowered their tuition. A remarkable finding. So I think we've got to take some pretty drastic looks at this financial situation.
Just as we're going over here to the next question, I agree 100%. And see, we've answered some questions, but I don't know if we really looked at solutions. But to me, smaller, almost strip mall type systems, Adventist systems that are 2-year systems, you can charge a lot less. I was just reading an article again about the systems, the accounting systems. And when you think you're doing well, it's the accrual accounting system. And if you're really looking at the cash accounting system, then that's where a lot of the privates, they were using the accrual accounting system, and they looked okay. But when you really sat down and looked at it, it was the cash accounting system that was showing that they weren't doing well, and there we are.
My comment is more of an observation than a question. I think we're looking at a small piece of a much larger problem. Adventism in North America and Western Europe has been stagnant or declining. The value of an Adventist education depends upon the perceived value of Adventism. Without addressing the more basic problem, you can reduce the cost of tuition You can open up junior colleges, you can do all sorts of things. But if people don't see the value of spiritual and religious and personal value of Adventism, our schools are going to decline.
Nicely stated, and I would say that if you look up there on Sabbath morning, Robert Benny addressed this whole issue of faith and learning and how faith-based colleges and universities need to find a way to, in a winsome way, articulate the Christian faith in powerful, compelling ways to where families say, you know, I want my kid to go to a Christian college and university so that they can be a powerful witness for Jesus Christ. And so we've got to be able to do that as well. You're right.
Okay, I have a question, actually a couple questions, and I'm looking at the time. My first one is not so much a question as a comment. Michael Schofield sent some things out this week, and I don't know who got it, but one of those was very good. The philosophy of Seventh-day Adventist education has changed drastically since from 100 years ago. I'm not saying let's go back to the blueprint, quote unquote, but I think we have to recognize it's a different dynamic. We've just trained pastors, doctors, and nurses, and teachers, and that was basically it. You mentioned that if they go to college, if students graduate from Adventist college, chances are they're going to be more involved in the church. Is that a cause and effect, or is that an association factor?
There were several studies done, and I'm not sure I could answer for both, but there was a study done at Andrews in the 70s, I believe, 70s or 80s, and it showed the longer that a student was in an Adventist school, K through 16, the more likelihood that they would stay in the church. The one that we are working on right now with Larry Burton, it's looking at persistence, and we're looking at other church or other faith-based colleges like the Nazarene, the Lutheran, and what they've discovered is in a lot of the faith-based schools and church schools, the longer, this is not just for Adventists, the more likely they will be still in that religion and a member of the church. So it's not just looking at the Adventist church, but it's looking at the other faith-based schools as well. So, yeah, it is. But I think Michael has raised a question on it's not the same. Is there something that we should do different to help them understand the reputation that we have, what we're doing here for them? Is it something of value, as we've talked about? I don't know if we've done a good job of tooting our own horn and saying, hey, look at the value that we have here. You know, Loma Linda, and I work for the School of Allied Health, you can blink and people will come. I mean, it's barely, you don't have to do a whole lot. Now, we are doing a lot to recruit the right students, but they're here because of the career. And what I am at all the Adventist colleges doing advising. I was just at Southwestern last week, and I'll be at Walla Walla, or this week, and I'll be at Walla Walla this coming week. And I have noticed that there are departments that have closed, there are programs that are closing, they are changing some, but it's not very fast. And so, and I will also tell you, a lot of them are looking at healthcare, putting in healthcare programs, which are in straight competition of us. So if we just want to look at Loma Linda, we're going to be upset about it. If we want to look at a system, how can we help them? And I know that when Andrew started their PT program, Wayne Perry left here. He was a faculty member, and him and Larry Chinnick worked together, and they started the program there. It's similar, same thing with Adventist University Health with Scott Binney. He was a student of ours, a faculty of ours. So I think we're working with them. And then the question is are they in straight competition? You could say yes, but I will tell you, usually we get more students from the West Coast. They get, you know, Michigan, Andrews gets more students from the East and Northeast, and Florida gets them from Florida. I mean, right now we're able to do it, but here's the problem. We're not filling them up with Adventist students. We're filling them up with students that want to be in a faith-based school and be in PT.
Leo, I have to wrap this up, but you have one.
Well, with respect to what you just said, I mean, the data is clear for us. If you have your kid go from K through medical school here at Loma Linda, they're going to be an Adventist for life, without question. And here's the thing, we as Adventists through the years have felt that that's really important, and we look upon that in an evangelistic manner. In our churches, we've not said this, subsidize Adventist education in strong ways. I was an elder of Pacific Union College Church for many years, and I well remember over 40% of the church's budget went to. Some actually wondered, do we exist to support Adventist education or to be a church? So that's been our level of support for Adventist education through the years that you see in our churches.
Okay, and as Dr. Branstetter said, my term, or my statement is time's up. And so, by the way, my son is on the finance board of his school in Ukiah, and they do 80%. So I don't know. Anyway, David, did you want to mention for next week?
Dr. Keto will be helping us
Raise your
with
hand, Dr.
logic.
Keto.
He has a new book out on logic. We've been talking about the importance of logic. So, Peter, you better be here.
Now, is this going to be one, it's going to be, you said how many weeks?
3 weeks.
3 weeks.
3 weeks in a row. He has a brand new book out, and so come buy the book on Amazon and be ready to go.
Okay.
It's not on Amazon yet.
Okay.
We've had some hangups, but I'll have extra copies here.
Okay.
And the important thing about it, the proceeds from the book actually go to support K-12 education.
Okay.
All right.
So,
Okay.
So it's legal to buy them on the Sabbath?
No, I was going to say after sundown, we'll have sale. We'll just take it out, we'll take credit cards.
Contributing to Adventist education.
There you go. All right, let's have our benediction. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.